Apple's HomePod might be a dud, while the US government probes the battery throttling controversy. LG settles the G4 boot looping class action lawsuit, and let's dig into the future of 5G. We've got a lot to talk about, so make sure you're charged and ready for episode 290 of the Pocketnow Weekly. Recorded February 2nd at noon Pacific, or close to noon Pacific, this weekly podcast is where we dissect and discuss those gadgets that make our lives mobile. Smartphones, tablets, and wearables. It's all the stuff you wished existed when you were a kid, and Boot Loops would have been the name of a terrible off-brand kid cereal. You know, it came in the bag, not in the box with the colorful graphics on it. I'm Juan Carlos Bagnell, senior editor at Pocketnow.com, joined as always by plucky podcast producer Mr. Jules Wang out on the East Coast. How's it going, buddy boy?
You know, I've always been more of an oatmeal square kind of person. Like Quaker has this good.
I see that. I see that.
In addition to the life, like they have the like little puffs things, and they like the store brands have them. They never really compare though. So
yeah, it's funny. Like there are a lot of generics have gotten really good now though, but when we were younger, if you got like the Baggo cereal, it's just like Lucky Charms, and you're like, no.
I'd say that we've gotten to like 75 or 80% of the enjoyment of them. So, I mean, if you really want to see like real off-brand, on-brand comparisons, you should check out the Cheap Show podcast, available where other fine podcasts are available. We were originally supposed to promote in our podcast this week, but it's not this podcast.
Right. We're throwing out a bone to a completely unrelated show. So
oh yeah, totally.
Not as
I wasn't expecting the whole intro thing, so I was like, yeah, that sounds like a good thing to get into. So
totally. So I think you should take that on our recommendation. No, we actually have some cool tech news to talk about this week. Just kind of getting the house in order, our pre-show all set before we start getting into the harvest season of rumors and news articles and releases that are going to be coming out around MWC time. It's hilarious. You start thinking like, well, the show's going to take place at the end of February, but February is a month that flies by. So we're already starting to sift through news coming out of what might be going down. And we'll also be going hands-on with a couple things on the channel too. Some more After the Buzz videos. We're going to be catching up on those. We just did the Galaxy S8 Plus. I'm going to be spending some more time with the BlackBerry Key 1. Huawei might be moving forward with some of their unlocked phones in the United States. Since they couldn't get a carrier deal, they're still looking for U.S. distribution on some of their flagships. And we still want to hear from you. We will be putting together another Listeners Take the Wheel or mailbag episode soon. So make sure you're sending us those comments and questions. And Jules, if someone wanted to join the conversation right now, how might they participate with this actual live broadcast of the show?
This cluster of a podcast that goes to air 15 minutes late, and no one's actually a good number of people are actually watching.
We have a show running right now through nothing but perseverance and fortitude.
Willpower. I get it. It's something that has to be acknowledged.
I have to apologize. Like my setup's super raw right now. My desktop is still out of commission. I'm trying to fix up a few things and clean out some of the casing. And I thought I was going to be able to get it done yesterday. So I'm running this from my laptop.
And I should really give a shout out to my newfound friend and colleague Ryan Hager from Android Police, who has lent me this space over here for me to use, and the gigabit internet that apparently he has.
I'm so flipping jealous. That is so not fair. I mean, like we're still like, I don't know, we're probably around 5 years away in Los Angeles from holding town hall meetings about the potential of examining the economic impact of a potential bid in Southern California to consider the future viability of fiber.
There's the first round commission report, and then a viability of the competition, and then you have to assess the bids, and then
do
report.
An economic impact, and then like what will it mean for people who own really nice homes because they won't want their homes disturbed by the poor riffraff. And like
probably PN Weekly, by the way, if you want to join the show, hashtag PN Weekly on Twitter if you want to get in and insert your own comments about the internet, about about stuff like that, because the internet 5G is going to be a big topic in our second segment of this podcast. So we really want to get you in on that, as well as the rest of the news. By the way, you can actually access the rundown and see what we're actually talking about by clicking the link in the description on the YouTube channel and Pocketnow.com. Hello, we run that site. It's a place that you can.
We run that site, yo.
We run that site. No shizzle, man.
I love it. You know what? Let's jump into some hot news. The top stories that we get to talk about this week, as cultivated by the writers on Pocketnow.com.
Yeah, and I'm one of those writers. So let's just go through them for the week of what was it, January 30th. This is all the news that is fit to podcast. Apparently, HomePod, demand for the smart speaker from Apple's first, is not stacking up to the usual standards that we have seen, whereas iPhones have sold out in minutes from launch time. We've seen the original sales date, February 9, still tacked on to pre-orders made after the weekend of its launch. It launched last Friday, so and it still has not yet to do anything except be available at places as opposed to selling out. So that's interesting. We'll get into that. Apple is potentially a little stressed out too, perhaps because of the iPhone SE2. There may be evidence, as KGI Securities claims, that there isn't enough resource and development to be able to put out an iPhone SE sequel, the favored mid-ranger of Juan Carlos Bagnell's of 2016. It may not get a follow-on, at least for this year. U.S. government agencies are looking into Apple's behavior in terms of throttling certain iPhones, older iPhones, in the case that they are protecting the battery from overcharging or from overexerting itself and causing shutdowns. But this behavior was not disclosed properly. It took them months to do that. So the SEC, the Security and Exchange Commission, as well as the Department of Justice are looking into that behavior right now. LG has actually went to arbitration. It was initially reported from the law firm Gerard Gibbs LLP, representing a class action against LG on boot loop issues that weren't properly supported, that they would get rebates, refunds, cash, and credit. And now it appears that it was either inaccurate or it was too early of a report, because all that the class is getting now through arbitration is extended warranties. We'll dig into that in just a bit as well. 10 gigabytes of RAM. Who needs 10 gigabytes of RAM? Who needs 512 gigabytes of storage on their Android smartphones? Apparently that's in the cards for Chinese manufacturer Vivo. They were the ones that introduced the first phone with the under-display fingerprint sensor from Synaptics. And now, thanks to slides leaked out to Weibo, presentation slides, we see that 10 gigabytes of RAM is in the cards for the X-Play 7, X-Play being the flagship series for Vivo right there. So we're going to look at that in a bit. Strava, one of the big compilation services for fitness tracking, for data, for geocaching that fitness tracking data, is getting a good looking at from military bases, because a lot of military personnel who do their workouts, they have been apparently tracked. Their patrol paths have also been tracked, and all this data is public, is available, and it took a college kid just a few minutes to figure this out. So it's an interesting InfoSec failure in a sense.
That was a fun find there. Failure. Yeah.
Failure. Yeah. It's a failure of epic proportions. But I want to start off with the Huawei P20. Apparently, there's going to be an event in Paris on March 27th.
They never invite me to like the Parisian events. What's going on there?
It's always the Germanic events that.
No, don't get me wrong. Germany's super cool. I mean, like, I have a good time in Germany. I get along with the Germans. They're fun. I think they're super fun people. But you know, and just it's either that or San Francisco. And I'm just saying, if there's other things going on,
I mean,
we could
is
go to
this
some
their
of these
first
other.
time in Paris? I don't recall them going to Paris for any certain events.
Yeah, well, and actually, I think this year they might be looking at swapping out. So instead of doing a, you know, that sort of German home base launch, which I never was completely, I never completely understood why Huawei picked Germany
I
as
mean,
one
it's
of
one of
their
their
major
strongest
launch sites.
consumer bases, in addition to the UK, which they sometimes do for honor events as well. But
Right.
between,
So
yeah,
maybe the conventional wisdom is like if you show Paris a little love, can you crack more into that sort of like you know, Iberian Peninsula market and make a little bit more headway in Spain and Portugal too?
because I mean, they have shown strengths in the top EU countries, but it's not, well distributed. They're again stronger than other places, stronger in these places than other places. So, it's interesting to see. Three cameras. We've been talking about this for a while. And
Yeah.
it seems like we had a little debate about the name, whether it was going to be the P11, P12. Well, excuse me, the P12 was supposed to be. They trademarked these names like years
Mm.
in advance, just thinking that they can just go down the line. And it appeared that this name, the P11, was in more offices, was at more offices than the P20 name. But turns out that, well, at least Evan Blass says that the P20 name will stick around.
And
So,
his word is bond. Yeah, I'll
yes.
be curious to see. We've been getting numerous questions, especially from Huawei fan and friend of the show Andrew Wallace at Fat Produce, who I think he's rocking a Mate 9. Really hope the P10, and I think he means the P20, introduces the standard monochrome and color sensor setup along with an ultra wide third camera. That precedent would be great to have as an industry standard going forward. I wonder if we're talking about a triple camera arrangement on the back, if they will play with any kind of focal length changes. I'd be curious if we're talking about three cameras working together, a wide angle camera can't really contribute to that setup as well as a zoom can, because of you start changing the focal lengths. You deal with varying degrees of distortion. So I think if one of them is going to be some form of zoom, it'll probably be a zoom in, not an ultra wide. But I'll be curious to see, because we keep throwing around this like 40 megapixel output, you know, like buzz. And I would really hope that maybe if you have three matched sensors, three matched focal length sensors, you become more of like a Lytro style camera in how you acquire light and how you can play with depth effects. Maybe some of that information can feed into things like augmented reality, and you can have like sort of a smarter post-processing setup on the phone, since that's kind of where everyone's going to anyway. It's less about putting on the biggest possible camera sensor and more about how can you manipulate the data once the raw image has been captured.
Well, it's about the raw data itself that you capture and how you can creatively trick the hardware out so that you have all this data, and you can use the more data that you have, the more you can manipulate it. Is what I'm saying here.
Oh, totally.
Renato reports with the PN Weekly hashtag on Twitter. Well, they have the partnership with Leica and Tuev, so I think this was the logic behind Germany. Fair point.
Oh,
Huawei
that's right
does
too. I forget about that. Yeah.
yeah, and but German companies, so that makes sense. David Baptista da Silva says Americans should take advantage of their easy to that's LG. We'll get to that later. I'm trying to get to all these tweets here, and it's
Well,
like,
and Peter Hayton also just sort of confirming that idea that Leica is also a German company, and that makes sense for them to be launching Leica products in partnership. That's another thing that we could also potentially consider is for Leica's benefit. Would a phone platform be a way for a traditional camera company to experiment with future iterations of photography? And so does Leica stand to benefit from this type of an arrangement for when they start releasing standalone products? If Leica wanted to get into the Lytro space, and make their own L16 style camera, then I think the data they could glean from a smartphone experiment with a triple sensor could be very helpful in moving forward on future products and services. I don't know. I mean, like, that's actually kind of that just kind of popped in my head. That's kind of an interesting idea. If this is a truly symbiotic relationship and that information can flow freely both ways, then Huawei might be enabling sort of a new generation of point and shoot cameras in a really smart fashion.
Well, I guess we'll have to see. I mean, we are about that's like 3.5 weeks out of MWC, so they're
Yeah.
trying to be one of the manufacturers to get themselves away from the noise. But
Do you think that's
there isn't
smart?
much. Well, there isn't much noise this year, right? Because LG is going to be after the show, and it's really just going to be the Samsung that going on there.
So that's actually isn't that the big fear? Where last year we had some really great announcements happening at MWC because we knew Samsung was going to be doing its own thing. Samsung sort of leveraging MWC for themselves. Wouldn't you want to get out of the Samsung vortex and, excuse me, do your own sort of press conference? I mean, I think Huawei can survive doing their own press conference. I don't think they necessarily need the reporter base of bloggers and journalists that are all going to be in one place at one time for MWC. That they can do their own announcements and still find reasonable traction on getting the news out there.
Well, the thought of mine is, at one point, oh, let's get out in front of them. Maybe that will help. No, we should wait afterwards, or somehow let this vortex of attention, as you put it, is just not good for the companies that would come otherwise around that line. So yeah, it's we'll have to see
and also
if this
there's an opportunity if they can do something really cool with the P20. So you get out after Samsung, and then just before you can if you can get in that window in between when Samsung announces and when Samsung is really shipping product in earnest, and then do something a little disruptive like saying, oh yeah, Samsung, they finally stapled 2 cameras onto the back of the Galaxy S9 Plus, but on our P20 we've got 3 cameras. Like instead of the megapixel war, we've got the camera sensor war.
Well, it depends on how granular Huawei wants to market their device
Right.
coming up, because so far so vague. But you mentioned something about the vortex of attention or something, or like the maps of the world and whatnot. This is so ungraceful of a segue over to Strava, but we'll take it anyways. The header image that we're using is not that definitive, because of course it's when you pull out to a whole view of Europe or wherever, on a continent scale you really don't see individual paths. But apparently this person, Australian student, was looking at this. Nick Waters. No, he's an ex. Well, Nick. Well, let's take Nick Waters' comment here, because he's an ex-infantry officer, and he perhaps best described the situation as a big OPSEC and PERSEC fail: operational security and personal security. And if you wear, and this came across U.S. and Russia, and like plenty of the infantry. Just who happens to be taking care of their fitness and likes to do so in a more technical manner, will be wearing a Fitbit or whatever, and they might be wearing their Fitbit on their patrols. And when you see this data trove, good luck to those who want to breach wherever that base is. So.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's also, I think we're going to see continued clashes. There was a really high upvoted story on Reddit. Again, another editorial talking about all of these tech companies that monitor every waking moment of our lives through mobile devices and smart speakers, and like we're kind of running into a decision point. We're running into a pain point where we need to decide what the future of commerce, of advertising, personal data tracking, storage, all of these things are going to be coming to a head in a way that could be very upsetting to the current market that we have. Again, huge opportunities for other players to jump in, but this is like another data point in this vast sea of who do we trust with our data? Who do we trust with our movement? Who do we trust with very personal and granular information? I mean, the things we just take for granted, how much I love having all day heart tracking information on my smartwatch. Yet that still has to live in a big cloud bucket on someone else's server, and it can only be as safe as however safe or safeguarded that server might be. So there's a lot of trust, there's a lot of faith that these companies are going to be acting in the best interests of their customers, because that's what the market would dictate. That's what, you know, capitalism would dictate. If they do a poor job of it, then I'll move on to another solution. But we're also at a time where consumers have never been more entrenched. If Apple suddenly failed and violated the privacy of a huge swath of their customers, I would be curious to see how many of them would actually use that as the justification for leaving the platform and how many would stay. Ditto Samsung. Ditto any other major corporation in the space. Ditto Amazon. If there was a sudden Amazon breach, how many people would be like, oh, I'm totally mad. I'm never shopping with them again until tomorrow.
So I want you to remember back at least a decade and a half. Remember tennis great John McEnroe?
I never forget tennis great John McEnroe. He is always in my thoughts.
He hosted the game show, right?
Oh, he does tons of TV. Actually, I really like his commentary. My wife is a huge tennis fan, so anytime there's like a major tournament, we're watching the tennis, and his commentary is great.
I'm trying to get somewhere, dude. Come on, you gotta play with me.
I would actually, have to profess my undying love and affection for tennis great John McEnroe. That's all I'm saying.
So back in 2002, he hosted a show called The Chair. It was a game show, mixed trivia with heart rate limits, and between the questions you had to face very confronting challenges that raised your heart rate, that got your fear up, and you had to lower your heart rate to a certain level before you could progress on to the next question. Otherwise, your cash value would your cash winnings would drop off.
That sounds like a ghastly show.
I'm thinking that at some point we'll have a movie where it'll take the form of the Chair game show, and then hackers will create this world where everyone is they extort money from them unless their heart rates are like below a certain level or something.
Kind of be like Speed, but with your heart rate instead of the bus's speedometer.
Yeah, mentally going on. Yeah, there's lots of mental games, abduction. That could be the dystopian movie we need in order to turn the tide on this whole data tracking and just get people more aware and more careful about this stuff.
Well, and we're definitely in that phase of a lobster pot effect, because I think if some of this tech had come out even like 5 years ago, I think consumers would have been a lot more skeptical. I keep pointing to the example of the Xbox Kinect and how many people reacted fairly negatively to the idea of an always-on listening microphone in your living room. And now on the regular, we're getting reports about smart TVs being compromised. We're putting smart speakers in every room of the house, and people often aren't utilizing the best possible security or two-factor authentication or keeping those devices updated against potential security threats. And it's just sort of commonplace that we've traded a significant portion of our privacy for convenience. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but along the way, we do need to audit this industry, not an individual company, but audit the industry to say who's doing a good job, who do we trust, and what potential threats are out there. And again, a story like this, where we're talking about military troop movements, I don't understand a military policy which doesn't react viscerally, swiftly, and with a high degree of precision in fixing a problem like that. The most immediate idea that comes to mind is, like, if you're active duty, if you're involved with troop movements, if you're in logistics, you don't get to wear smartwatches and fitness trackers.
This is where the developing markets, all the developing markets that we've talked about, take over. Like, all they have to do is use the plot data and just come up with some conniving schemes to enter their base and take them over and get all the passwords and whatnot. I think this is going to be the turn of the new world order that we've been looking forward to. I don't know.
Hooray! I, for one, welcome our new AI robot overlords.
I, for welcome 10. I don't even know what I'm saying. 10 gigabytes of RAM.
You failed. That's
I, for welcome.
I'm the worst at segues. Excuse me. Again, in cleaning out my PC and trying to fix my workstation, My office is so full of dust right now. I'm trying not to just hack in front of the microphone. And it's so gross because it's probably mostly like degraded human skin cells. So 10 gigabytes of RAM, 512 gigabytes of storage. 2 years ago, I would have said, how ridiculous. This is complete overkill for a phone. I'm cranky and old. Kids, get off my lawn. Why do you need that? Wham, 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 wham. The fact that I've now been producing a lot of content directly from my phone, putting together vlogs, editing video on the fly, writing documents while watching movies, some fairly aggressive use directly from a phone. And I'm super excited about future products that will do better screen mirroring or enable a desktop mode. I am now 100% completely on board and wanting to see if we can push this even further. Like, I want 4K displays.
Where's the 16 gigabytes of RAM? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, I want to push our phones into true laptop grade spec territory, especially as we already have some pretty clear indications that we've got things on the horizon, like Windows on ARM. Once we have Project Linda, Asus's mobile line of displays, accessories that better implement or mimic a laptop style or a desktop style control. Just the fact that you can easily plug a USB cable into a device. I did a little hands-on review on, you know, like a capacitive stylus for all phones. Those things all wrapped up together, I do think speak to the blossoming power of smartphone in your pocket in a much wider ecosystem of actually getting to done. And so I think Qualcomm 845 is going to be one of those good transitionary time periods as we start making that migration into true productivity, laptop grade productivity that fits in our pocket and can be expanded upon either through, you know, gimmicks like folding screens or good ecosystem accessories like laptop cradles and external displays.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I'm just wondering what the heck I can do with 16 gigs of RAM on a phone right now, and to be honest, I can't think of any ways that I would be able to follow it up without, you know, just having natural bugs and whatnot slow it down. So until right. that we get to the point where we miniaturization of the fabrications that we use to produce these chips, get, you know, so that 16 gigs of RAM doesn't seem ridiculous to put into a 5-inch phone.
No, you're not wrong, because we're still ahead of the curve. You know, we're the hardware is still going to be far and away overkill for what software currently can do. But when I say the 845 as a transitionary step, I mean over the life cycle of the 845. And I'm assuming around 2 years of use for this chipset for people who are buying into this ecosystem. By the time we get to the end of life on the 845, I wholly expect that we'll have seen another generational or 3 generational improvement to apps and services. So where we were when the iPad 9.7 Pro came out, where I couldn't finish a review of the iPad on the iPad. I tried to edit video and record the VO. I tried to do everything in my production on the iPad, and I couldn't quite finish a video that would have been similar to how I would have produced a video on my laptop. Flash forward a year to Android devices with Power Director and, you know, good hardware and good RAM and 4K video shooting and rendering capabilities. And I can do it now. I can finish these videos. I can get my actual work done. We've transitioned into true pro productivity. We have a lot of bugs to work out. App developers
would like to have more of, you know, the customization, because the features, you still have to put in a 16:9 art asset, and you can't have PNGs and whatnot. So
oh no, I can do all that. I can do transparencies, I can do transitions, I can do 3 tracks of images, 5 tracks of audio, I can do color correction, I can do green screen, I can do all of it. It's not as seamless and it's not as fluid as when I'm producing on a proper workstation. But
I think we're still I'd argue that I need one more, like a couple more of those things going on here, but we're getting close. We're getting close.
But that's what I'm saying is, if we're talking about transition, we're never there. It's all a work in progress. It's all constant
transition.
change.
This is life is transition until death.
Totally. And so over the next 2 years, considering how far we've come over the last year, over the next 2 years, I feel that there could be a segment of this population, especially as more specialist devices come out. That was a really cumbersome sentence, especially as more specialist devices come out, but it's only going to take a handful of players in this space to show off truly high-end and demographic-focused solutions. A player like Red getting into this space starts to bring legitimacy to a market of mobile high-end video production and using your phone to fit into that kind of workflow. A few more players like that really speaks to where we could go with this style of work and productivity. And if we have a couple companies out there that are actually trying to push the boundaries on making sure the hardware solutions are in place for the developers to take advantage of that, then I think that's the right play. I think that's the right direction to handle. It's all the more interesting that it's coming from a company like Vivo, where the few products that I've experienced of theirs have been more that sea of mid-rangers and selfie cameras and like really popular sort of, younger consumer fare. To see them come out with some of these specs means that the specs war is kind of done. You can make a phone that's essentially laptop grade powerful, and now it's up to software developers to take advantage of it.
I think there's still just more in terms of OEM to OEM PvP sword fighting, but that's for.
Well, but what I'm saying is when you actually get to the consumer facing release, there's going to be a ton of stuff happening behind the scenes. There's still a ton of argument over how we're going to handle neural processing, AI, machine learning. Everyone's trying to create their own standard that plugs into universal, development. But
for what it's worth, the discs themselves, we could be talking about 2 4 gigabyte LP or DDR3 discs, and then like a 2 gigabyte LP DDR3 or 2 even, and then that could be like the 10 gigabytes that they're doing. But you'd hope that something happens in terms of getting those parts together in high quality, high throughput. And just
getting into the grind on what the actual hardware is, that will be important. And I know a lot of people especially in our comments on videos are going to be paying attention to, even just what class and grade of storage is that for 512? Are you going to be getting 512 gigabytes of like UFS 2.1? People are going to care about that, but the vast consumers out there, once it's consumer facing like that, and once those specs actually exist, and we start to see some software taking advantage of more aggressive hardware, they're not going to care.
At least the first blush. The first blush is always going to be there. They're not going to care, but they'll learn over time.
But we do have a tweet from Renato Laporte using PN Weekly. 10 gigabytes of RAM on a phone. Finally, I can use Chrome.
Even mobile Chrome is just
like once we have hardware like that, think about blurring the lines between Chromebooks and Chrome as a desktop style operating system, and the web browser on your phone being a truly desktop grade browsing experience, as we're adding components of apps that are downloaded momentarily for that actual instance. You don't have to load a full app because you'll have these sort of apps on demand services. Like all of this stuff ties together for having a significant amount of desktop grade storage and memory to accomplish these tasks. Again, we talk about the death of Windows Phone, but Microsoft could. I doubt they will, but Microsoft could pull some sort of back-end entry into the mobile space again, utilizing Windows as a service on ARM chipsets. Like there's potential there where, even 2 years ago, we would have mocked a move like that. But we should probably...
I'll mock it all day long. They're going to keep trying anyways because it's in their interests to try.
Oh, it totally is. It's just... It's all the funnier when we know that the top brass at Microsoft have no interest in that kind of mobile strategy, and they're pushing everything server side. I think they really are impressed with themselves about potentially unseating Apple as the most valuable company on the planet.
They ate their cake a long time ago.
LG, they asked, now they want the frosting, which is hilarious.
Well, they'll do it from the can.
Speaking of Apple, you want to go to LG? Dang it. See, I purposely threw the little Apple thing in there so we could make a transition. Okay, sorry. I'll shut up. I'll shut up. Just go. Just go.
Come on. Okay. So apparently I got the update this morning about the arbitration, apparently, because when I went into the story about LG's settlements with the class, it's like it had all the details, like it was reported beforehand. And Gerard Gibbs, the lawsuit that's representing the class here, had a site up dedicated to the settlement. And by the time I got to it, all the content was gone, and and apparently there was nothing I could get from the company about it. When I looked up like the original page where they said that they were working on the case, it just said LG is extending their warranty. Call LG, and that's all I got from them. And then apparently Ars Technica made the official calls, and apparently that's all they're getting. So.
Well, first of all, let's just kind of recap. Sorry. I do apologize, listeners and viewers. Like I am trying as hard as I can not to hack up with all of this dust going through my lungs right now. Real quick, can we recap what did the settlement, what did the class action lawsuit reveal, or what were some of the benefits? Because we've been hearing the echo chamber on LG plus boot loop since the G4. People who were concerned about it affecting the V10 Nexus devices, and out of all of the phones of LG recently, the G5 was my most problematic, where I went through 3 of them. And the one I have that still technically works kind of doesn't work. What were people in for? Is this just the G4? And as far as I know, and please correct me if I'm wrong, people who weren't a part of this initial batch of class action lawsuit participants are kind of SOL. Like they can't join this now that the settlement's been reached.
Yeah. All right. So the problem is that apparently the original issue with the G4 and the subsequent devices, being the V10, G5, V20, and the Google Nexus 5X, which LG produced, was that there was a soldering issue where it was important, like the PCB was not connecting to the CPU, and that was causing the boot loops themselves. Part of that, which is the main stub that we're talking about here, is LG not supporting that and not taking those claims and giving them due process, and that was part of the issue here. Now, Gerard Gibbs initially set up the class action to feature just the G4. That class expanded with the V10, G5, V20, 5X. And that was all in the start of 2017. Technically, a lot of companies actually have clauses in their contracts, for end users, that says that if you agree to certain things, or if you don't opt out, which was the case here, of certain things, then you agree to not sue LG, and you would go into arbitration to determine remediation. And what was initially reported, what was initially published actually, was a $700 credit for another LG handset, or $425 in cash. And there was a form out, and if you owned any of the devices that were affected, if you had a serial number proof of purchase, you were able to get into the payments. But that all got taken down, and what is actually being reported by ours here is that only those who joined the party, those who joined the class action, will be going forward with this apparently the settlement, and that other customers will be going forward with 30 months of from the date of purchase, that they can activate the warranty and get it replaced at no cost. So I mean, and we have seen some other alternatives. If they, if some adventurous people want to go to China and get some of the boards replaced to get 6 gigabytes of RAM, they can do that for like $120. That was an unofficial thing, but there's other ways
I don't
that
know. That seems like the best idea. Like how much you really want to revive.
eventually you just want to give the finger to the
Yeah.
whole process just because it's so
Well,
convoluted and
and we saw
ridiculous.
a separate Google problem, a Google solution when what was it, the 5X? Some of the settlement seems to have impacted Google's strategy for replacing 5Xs, which have had battery and boot looping problems.
And the
Where
6Ps too, because even though they're made by Huawei,
yeah. So
well,
there were some batches of that too. Again, I think it was a little bit harder to glean how chronic the issue was on the 6P versus just the echo chamber at work, whereas the 5X seemed, and again, I don't have numbers to back this up. These are just my feelers. The 5X seemed to have more ready and discernible problems. But I thought it was kind of interesting seeing like they release a program where they were going to be replacing select phones that were suffering from very specific problems with the Moto X4.
yeah, that's well, I mean, their phones from 2015 anyway. So at this point, they'd be well out of production, and they that I mean, so it could be that the lawsuits are part of it, but it's more likely that they're just out of production, and that the only way that they would be able to satisfy what they could in the warranty was to replace it with
What they consider
Moto
to be
X4.
comparable. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's there's a mix of that. We're getting into that twilight phase here where things just kind of blur.
Yeah,
And
it's kind of difficult to tell, like on a phone that came out, in 2015.
mm,
Are you really having problems that are manufacturer based, or are you just succumbing to your phone being 2+ years old?
life cycles, man, those are just great.
Well, I've been going through like just some old devices to kind of like see like if there's anything worth revisiting. Just how many of them won't power on, won't charge. You're like, oh no, tech does not last like we think
Mm.
it should. That's crazy.
Well, one of the few things that does last more often, surprisingly than not, is the iPhone. I mean, we've seen refurbished units go up for sale, and they seem to last pretty well if
Mhm.
left to their own devices and not, slammed and cracked over.
Prior to iOS 10, yeah, I think
Prior
that's
to
a sentiment.
iOS 10.2.3,
Right.
and then
we
again
couldn't
in
we
like
couldn't
iOS
possibly be talking about
11.2.
any specific
Yeah.
news.
So, what do you think about the DOJ and SEC trying to just go after and seeing if they can do anything about this? See if they can get a people against Apple case going on here. Is that what they're trying to do? Or
I think it's totally worth the investigation. I don't feel it truly rises to the level of actionable severe legal consequences to Apple, especially with whatever reason why Apple still gets to be a sweetheart company for state and federal governments. How many iPhones are utilized in military, national science, national defense, and politics? Law enforcement, like we've kind of arrived at the iPhone being some sort of de facto standard for all of these different agencies. I don't think we'll get to anything that's going to be severely punitive, but I really do hope that there is a public examination of the company's business practices, especially after we just went through all of these tax shenanigans with them, sort of playing ball with them, extorting a lower tax rate so they could repatriate funds that they weren't really paying their tax bill on, also that they could drop their tax rate. They weren't paying taxes and they want to pay less taxes is again, kind of a scummy business practice from a company that's supposed to be this American industry sweetheart. So I think they're overdue just some kind of examination into how they do business, how they relate with their customers, and like not just taking the narrative of Apple on its face value, really digging into some of these behaviors. I think they went a little too far. And I hope that enough of this messaging comes out that fans of iOS and fans of iPhones can demand from their favorite manufacturer improvements. You should not be building $1,000 smartphone which only has the bare minimum battery capacity to last you the day, and will degrade with no buffer. And their only solution is to slow down the power draw from the CPU. That is terrible design. That is very anti-consumer design. And it's cynically not only just planned obsolescence, but an aggressive tactic at trying to make yearly product cycles more desirable than they really are. You know, you get to that point where even after a year, you're now threatening phones. If you run the phone at full power, you could experience, reboots or, sudden power loss or, sudden power cycling, stuff like that. That's not okay. We should all be able to say that's not okay. So I do hope that we see some aggressive examination of the company, though I doubt anything seriously punitive will come from it.
I would like to see what happens in Australia because, according to a show that I peruse very often, The Checkout from ABC, their consumer law is pretty intense, and they have more strict terms about what's considered good for a life cycle or the life of the product and whatnot. They have plenty of stuff. So if anything, I mean, they've tried for certain things like iTunes purchases where.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of.
Well, and I bet you the EU will probably be a bit more aggressive too, just because Apple doesn't have the best name in Europe because of their tax shenanigans. So again, like regulatory agencies outside of the United States are all kind of itching to take a bigger bite out of this company. I realized like I could have gone full pun on taking a bigger bite out of the apple and then decided against it, but I still told you about the pun that was in my mind because that's good.
Well, podcasting. In the U.S., it's the cult of Mac.
Well, yeah, but again, we have this notion of them being this like, we're winning somehow by having one of the world's most profitable companies as an American company, but they're really not. Their headquarters were moved, on paper just so that they could benefit from preferential tax treatment overseas. So I feel like if they want to leave, then we should stop pretending that they're this darling of an American company while they're sort of holding jobs as ransom for, what they might build for a future campus or new Apple stores or new manufacturing here in the United States. If they don't want to play ball by the current rules and they want to throw money into offshore tax havens, then I don't think we should be giving them the kind of like special treatment that the company seems to get whenever they come up under these investigations.
I think any of those 20,000 new jobs will be dedicated to the iPhone SE2.
Probably not, as according to Pocketnow. I don't know if you've read this blog. It's a really handy tech news blog. They do a really good job of reporting on these kinds of stories.
Yeah.
That again, for all of their money, for all of their wealth, they keep a very limited team of engineers and developers on tap to build their products. And they are very aggressive about moving team members to different projects. There's a problem with iOS. They'll pull people off of OS X and MacBooks and Mac Pros to help with iPhone problems and vice versa.
The way Steve Jobs would have wanted to.
Well, I mean, but the thing is, like, I do believe that a company climate of trying to keep a small, dedicated, skunkworks level, top secrecy team of developers and engineers working on your products makes sense for how few products Apple actually produces. But that absolutely means that their resources are constantly completely maximized
when there are problems and
not only problems, just when they're doing business normally, when everything's working like it should, you're near capacity for what your team members can actually accomplish, and moving them around means you have to beg and borrow time from different projects. So it would make sense to me that in the land of iOS, if something was going to take a back seat for a short period of time, it would be a lower cost iPhone. I think especially with the iPhone 10 not resonating as well as I think Apple hoped it would in sales numbers, their solution isn't going to be, well, let's make up more money by dedicating resources to building a lower cost, lower margin iPhone. It's going to be, let's really make sure that for iPhone 9 or iPhone 11 or whatever it is that they're going to call it, that we can really come out swinging with a desirable lifestyle product that can build some buzz again. I think that makes more sense.
I wonder where the staff goes, because Microsoft, comparable staff roles of what is it, 100 something thousand, whereas Apple was last reported to have 120,000 or so. And Microsoft has been cutting down. It started mostly with the Nokia
Yeah.
runoff, with the hardware going away, and
And cuts into most of their hardware divisions. I
yeah,
mean,
it
I'm
just
amazed
kept
that
cutting.
Surface is still able to make anything at this point.
And even with that, but yeah, that's fair. But even with that, they're still mostly, doing software and whatnot, and that still warrants 100,000 people. Whereas Apple, like, where does the staff all go? Do they go to the stores? Because there's only like 50 people per store at best, if not, because
You know,
I
and
know there's
and
no.
I mean, because that's a very good question, Jules. And Apple is exactly the kind of secretive company where I doubt we'd ever get a very clear glimpse into how they dedicate resources. But for right now, I would be willing to put good money on the internal culture at Apple being all hands on deck for iPhone 9. That they want their highest margin product to launch as smoothly as they can. We saw the recent news that they're going to be backing off of new features in iOS until they can sort out some of the stability issues, fix some of the software gremlins, which are still plaguing iOS 11. They want to be, everything looks to me like a conservative implementation of dedicating resources towards next gen iPhone to be the proper relaunch of the iPhone brand. Finally get us away from the iPhone 6 form factor, potentially move all of their devices to 2:1 plus aspect ratio displays, and make sure that everything is cooking for them to recreate a level of desirability that iPhone 10 sort of fizzled at. That's what I think they're doing. And so they can't have, a lot of time, energy, or money dedicated towards refreshing iPhone SE, which is a shame. But I kind of feel like with the number of people I've met out there that still have iPhone 5Ss, iPhone 6s, let alone iPhone 6Ss, iPhone SE can exist like it can probably throughout this year. I wouldn't be surprised if at the end of this year I'm still perfectly happy with the experience on my iPhone SE. It's been working a champ. I've been happy. At the end of this year, I'll probably swap the battery just because it'll be cheap.
Yeah,
Like I'll
29
be able to take
bucks.
advantage of that. And moving forward, like if we can get a refresh on that for 2019, then maybe we're in good territory there again too. I just haven't
It's one
seen
of those
anything.
evergreen phones that you can always just plop it in and plop it
Well,
out.
and again, it really speaks to the usage of a phone like the iPhone SE. I'm not looking at the iPhone SE as a way to have top tier multimedia capabilities, or I'm not trying to produce, aggressive video content on it. It is the best on the go, short interaction, burst of interaction communications device for one thumb users. And I don't need a whole ton of horsepower to interact with social media, email, take a couple nice photos. It's not the best camera anymore, but it's still a good camera. I don't need to go crazy with the hardware to accomplish those tasks. And as long as it's still lean, fluid, smooth, simple, lower resolution display, not taking up too many resources, then the SE is still going to be delightfully competitive in a world of mid-rangers.
Mm. And finally, we got the HomePod here. Apple first bid into the industry. So basically, you just have to deal with Alexa. Is that it?
I mean, I think this world is currently going Alexa, Google Home, Bixby, and then HomePod. I'm gonna kind of parrot. There's a buddy of mine, Jason T. Lewis, who does Painfully Honest Tech on YouTube, and he's just kind of a groovy FM radio kind of voice, gonna tell you about all the things that bugs him and why HomePod is such a
On
fail.
Cool
Um,
101.3
yeah,
FM.
totally. He comes out. I mean, he's a cool dude. He comes out of like legit recording, so he's got that kind of vibe down. Like musicians
Talk to him through an
and writers,
ISDN.
and he's great. I did like a 3-hour Joe Rogan style conversation podcast with him last week. But his whole thing, you have to be careful as a company like Apple, because Apple does a tremendously good job of educating consumers and helping consumer bases interact with tech. One of the best advantages of Apple as a company is taking raw tech and polishing it up for a much nicer user experience within an ecosystem. But the danger of that is once you've educated consumers to interact with tech products, they can start to look at the rest of the market and see what other benefits there might be. So HomePod still for me fits into a category kind of like the Google Home Max, where audio doesn't cycle like tech does. If you already own a really nice home stereo system, home audio system, you're not going to want to replace major parts of that with janky little consumer tech speakers that can talk to you. You might want to incorporate smart assistant features, but you'll want to plug that into your existing framework, not replace your current audio solution with the actual noise generating hardware. And Apple is coming at this banking on their brand name. So it's an Apple premium product. The Apple label carries a premium price tag. Features won't be available at launch. And it doesn't outcompete current solutions. I mean, Jason brought it up, and I think he's spot on. It doesn't outcompete products like Sonos. And I think I would be willing to wager that if we did a blind taste test, that people listening to HomePod, listening to Google Home, listening to Echo, and listening to Sonos, that the Sonos would probably win in a blind showdown of audio quality between these different solutions, these different devices and products. And so this is the trap that Apple finds themselves in. They are not leading the way. They did not create this product segment. They're not doing anything to radically move the needle on this product segment, and they're just reacting to a market that they're falling further behind. I'm putting Apple, just above Cortana right now. Like this is not the killer app where I think they could have leveraged their user base on Apple TV to better incorporate audio and smart speakers into an Apple ecosystem, into an Apple lifestyle. Well, I don't think HomePod gets the job done.
Siri remote, you could have implemented skills like that.
That's what I'm saying.
That has been slow going.
Yeah, why? Because now you have a fracture in the Apple ecosystem where Apple TV could have been the backbone. I mean, my Samsung TV, we just got a new Samsung TV, a new QLED, and it's got a microphone in the remote to do voice actions on our smart TV that then control our speakers, interact with different apps and services, plugs directly into this whole ecosystem. We're using our Chromecast a little bit less because it's got better interaction with Amazon video streaming services.
Yeah, but the Apple TV competes with a whole bunch of over-the-top services. They're not necessarily, if people want an integrated experience with the TV, they can just get one with Google Assistant. I don't know.
Well, but that's what I'm saying is someone who was in the market for the Apple ecosystem and wanted an Apple TV, that would have been your user base for a HomePod. But already, a lot of people, their first line of audio interaction is going to be their TV or a sound bar connected to their TV. So what benefit does HomePod bring over the most accessed and most trafficked room of the house, having the best speaker system in the house and the best interaction capabilities through Apple TV already? You can't keep carving into the same market and not redefining this for new consumers to find why Apple might be the superior choice. This to me is what's so confusing about the HomePod launch is I think they're trying to shear the same sheep, but Apple TV has already sheared this sheep. And how do you convince people to double down on this when the Apple TV solution is superior?
I mean, it's all in the form factor, I think, because that's just you're going after what people recognize as the medium for a service. It's not Apple TV. The Apple TV had its chance, and in fact, it had taken until 2015 when Amazon debuted a speaker of all things, and that's where the craze is now. So unfortunately,
right, but Apple TV is still a decently performing segment for Apple. I mean, it doesn't have quite the same growth as Apple Music, but it still represents a growing market for products and services.
We don't have the exact mix of that because they don't
ever disclose it, but they, from their quarterlies, they do talk about what segments are growing, and Apple TV is commonly listed alongside services like Apple Music. So we know that there is a growing demo there. I just don't see how HomePod services that market any better than other iTunes capable Wi-Fi speakers that can be cross-platform or interact with multiple voice assistants or deliver better sound quality at a lower price. And the consumer who's really apt to do just a little comparative shopping is probably not going to walk away with HomePod being the victor in most showdowns, especially when they might already have something like an Apple TV to interact with. I think at that point you've lost the fight.
Apple thinks that media goes on TV and smart assistants go to digital, and that's why they're doing the efforts. They're siloing the efforts that they are doing like that. And but even that was following on a whole bunch of growth from Netflix and their biggest competitor ever now, Amazon. So
yeah. But even Apple was their platform for launching Siri in the living room, so again, for whatever uses that consumers might make in a smart assistant in the Apple ecosystem, I think they're already handled. And I think that's why we see my gross speculation on this story is I think that's why we see HomePod launching to very tempered responses, very very conservative reactions, and why you can still buy one. Like, they're not sold out. This isn't something that I think was really going to take the world by storm, and they're late to this product segment. And like Apple Watch, they need to now justify why their solution will be superior for consumers in a world where Alexa's gotten really good, Google Home's been getting better, and the sort of smart periphery of devices that listen to you and react to you and interact with other smart home features has gotten really good. Apple now needs to play catch up, winning the hearts and minds of consumers against the two other biggest tech companies on the planet. So it's going to be an uphill battle. I'm not saying Apple can't do it, but I totally appreciate, I totally understand why HomePod was the fizzle of a launch that it was.
Andrew Sislak, PN Weekly. What would Apple have to do to make those on Android consider jumping ship? They're already making people jumping ship, as they have touted quarter after quarter of growth of conversions from Android to iOS. So the phones are doing well for them, and there's always going to be the Android, as right now at least, the growth far paces any porting out that is happening. So for them,
it's a net positive. Especially in a mature market, I don't even know that it's necessarily a direct situation where Apple needs to say we can make Android users switch teams. More, I think the company that's really going to set the stage for the next phase of interneting is going to be the company that finds some killer hooks into the novel application of data and services in augmented reality, in smart home, and in making services platform agnostic. I was getting into a conversation with Renato Laporte just on Twitter here, a couple tweets back and forth. And he was saying, like, it'd be really cool if we have Windows on ARM. I could have an Android phone that then turns into a Windows PC when I plug it into a laptop. It'd be the same hardware. They'd have the same support. And we're getting to a point where I might not need it. I might not need Windows if I can already do my writing and editing in Microsoft Office, and I already have apps and services that follow my cloud OneDrive. I already have video editing software that works sort of platform agnostic. The operating system isn't really going to matter that much. Yeah. And so Apple, I think, just needs to get ahead of what the next phase of their relationship with consumers is going to be. They had this huge coup with consumers putting smartphones into consumers' hands with the iPhone. That gave them 10 years of market dominance, but I don't think it's going to carry them through if they are late to the party on the next phase of data and services. I think
so much of better than first that we can take. That Apple can take.
Well, and Apple was first for targeting consumers. Before the iPhone, smartphones were targeted at business people. And why would you need email all the time? What are you, on some kind of leash? That's not sexy or desirable. BlackBerries are ugly. Windows phones are clunky. Palm Pilots are laggy. Like, everything was painful for consumers until the iPhone gave you a real web browser in your pocket. That's what's going to dictate the next phase of the top most successful company in tech ruling the ecosystem, is who's really got the balls to make that play first, who's really got the chutzpah to transition over into a new form of interactivity with services that consumers latch onto. And right now, no one wants to be first. No one wants to be first because they'll be criticized more than people will actually go with them on that experiment. And then the second company to come out with that will actually win just because the first company introduced the concept, consumers started to get comfortable with it, and then someone else comes along and makes it exciting and sexy. That's why we're in this big holding pattern. I think we could probably be further along in AR, heads-up tech, face computing, better audio interactions, and AI if we were able to convince consumers to go along with a few more experiments rather than being so conservative about everything.
Andrew Wallace, also on the hashtag PN Weekly on Twitter. We're still live, people. You can still join in. We'd like to see some new faces too. Apple is to iOS 11 like Android is to ice cream sandwich. I was about to comment that it would be more like lollipop just because of how inefficient it was in tying with the Qualcomm issue of that year.
Yeah, that's true.
Honestly, just because of how many bug fixes that this had to happen. Ice cream sandwich also introduced, it was Jelly Bean, and then it was, for a time, and then Kit Kat, and I sort of consider 4 as like this whole family of updates, as opposed to just one certain thing, and it's just like, well, I don't think that's fair.
We've been focused on iOS 11 bugs because they've been so uncharacteristically aggressive from a company like Apple. Like some pretty bad problems that iOS launched with that needed fixing after consumers already got their hands on the update. But that shouldn't completely overshadow some of the teething pains that we've had for Android 8. Now, Oreo has had a few little gremlins that they're getting fixed.
The stoppage of updates from rolling out.
Right. They've been fixed. A lot of these have been fixed in Android 8.1, but then we have to have that conversation about the Android ecosystem not pushing out updates directly to consumers. How many phones will be getting Android 8? I've got my Huawei Mate 10 Pro, Android 8. That's super cool. I've got my Xperia XZ1 Compact, Android 8. That's really cool. When should I expect that we'll get some of these power management and device stability gremlins ironed out with 8.1 updates? And will those companies skip 8.1 to do some future, 8.2 or 8.3 build of Android?
Central phone. They're just going to skip 8.0 for 8.1.
Yep. And that's the right play. But it's also taking so long. There should have been an Android 8.0 update for the Essential phone with
or 8.1 should have happened quicker. 8.1 should have happened quicker. If 8.0 was going to be that buggy, then 8.1 should have been just, let's abandon the 8.0 and just go for it right away. So, one final tweets
from Andrew. Yeah, I just caught that one too.
Oh, you Andrew?
From Andrew Sislak. Do you see that one? Oh, okay. Yeah. He was just Andrew Sislak using the PN Weekly hashtag. Premium audio companies incorporating smart technology is way better than buying speakers from a tech company. And I'm potentially looking at hosting a debate on things like the 3.5 millimeter headphone jack and the future of audio in a number of different arenas.
People, you want to get Sonos and Harman representatives together and just
when flipping Bowers and Wilkins are putting out Bluetooth headsets with active noise cancellation, there's definitely something turning in the world of audio. And I know what companies I trust for high quality audio, and a lot of them are starting to embrace not only mobile, but just like home tech in general. Sennheiser put out a sound bar. That's crazy. That's crazy. Sennheiser is like one of the most respected, recording audio technology companies on the planet, and they have some really compelling consumer-focused tech on the horizon, which could be very disruptive and very exciting.
I was going to end this on David Batista de Silva's cynical comment. Folks, no company makes billions by spending money on workers or quality. This is business 101. And he has a gif of Mr. Smithers from The Simpsons just wriggling his fingers against each other.
Yes. Well, we do want to wrap up this week's show talking about just a little thought experiment on some politics and some business news that broke. The White House commented on some of the story, got kind of walked back a little bit, some fears in the market, and just interesting seeing different factions of White House communications discussing these topics, and finding pushback from other agencies like the FCC. And that's, of course, we're talking about the news on some of the internal reports in the White House on Trump looking to nationalize a future 5G network for the United States, cutting China telecommunications equipment out of the loop, and potentially even taking the future of 5G out of the hands of corporations, ISPs, and cell phone carriers to make it a state-run solution for networking and telecommunications. American citizens would do business directly with the federal government to utilize future 5G services. That story was walked back, that this report wasn't timely, that it was a dated report, just an internal sort of examination of the market, not necessarily.
It came from a senior National Security Council person.
Right. And again, something that they weren't actively looking at the potential for implementation, but was just sort of, sort of a political what if scenario that they were examining internally. And along the way, both conservative and liberal members of the FCC expressing concern and disagreeing with this as a potential recourse for the future of telecommunications. And this is definitely one of the more interesting topics because, I don't know that I'd ever would have considered myself agreeing with FCC Chairman Ajit Pai on anything. Yet his reply to this was something that I found I feel a number of liberals and conservatives in the tech space probably would have agreed on. The idea of a fully nationalized 5G network, completely owned, operated, and controlled by the federal government, probably a bad idea.
Yeah. So now I would be interested in considering what it would be like if we had a public infrastructure in the first place, because we have roads, we have telephone system has been dominated by one company, and it was forced to break up and then recombine all together again. There's been a lot of movement in the telecommunications space, mobile too, and but it's still it's a very highly competitive. It's the frontier of telecommunications at this point, and billions of dollars are being poured into it. But what if the government decided, hey, let's build the network anyways, or if there was a ground level kind of thing going on, if they didn't have to acquire existing construction sites or whatnot.
Well, and they could leverage eminent domain to build anywhere they wanted. So this would be, if we're entertaining this as some sort of intellectual exercise, immediately I think we can point to the success of the network unrolling and being built very, very quickly. I know a lot of people would probably disagree with me on, the federal government can't do anything right, says straw man who disagrees with
But you don't have to deal with freaking, media acquisitions and, hey, here's the government trying to sell off freaking Mad Men or something.
Well, and precisely because the government can also, enact and remove rules which could have been barriers immediately. Like they make the rules, so the rules technically don't apply to them because they can change the rules on the fly for however they want to utilize this network. The other thing that could be a net positive for consumers would be having one universal and unified standard across the entire country. It would immediately cut out the fake competition we have between carriers like Sprint and Verizon on one side using CDMA for their fallback 3G, opposite T-Mobile. Is it US Cellular? Yeah, US Cellular and
US Cellular is CDMA still.
US Cellular CDMA also?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I thought they were GSM. Okay, sorry. Flip that, reverse it. But again, we have sort of a fake dichotomy of competition between replicated technologies. There really wasn't any positive or benefit for consumers having CDMA and GSM-based 3G in the market at the same time. We just reinvented the wheel, and it caused a significant amount of consumer lock-in. So you couldn't do what they do in Europe, where you could take your phone to another carrier for competition. We lacked that capability here. We had much stricter consumer lock-in because of those differing technologies. So that would be a potential benefit, is not monkeying around with sort of artificial constraint in the market if the federal government dictates this is our network, this is how you connect to it, and this is the universal compatibility that devices will have to adhere to.
Well, there's still a lot of debate about, its relationship with the private sector, because they're still producing the telecom equipment and the ultimate end user component of all this stuff. And, there has to be some jockeying around of that too.
Yeah, but the government would arrive on one standard. They would put it up. They would put up like no bid contracts so that American infrastructure companies would immediately profit to the tune of billions and billions of dollars. And then we would have one throughput. We would have one method of connectivity that they would have complete control over. So really, as soon as you get out of those two consumer benefits, from my perspective, everything else is a tragic negative for the federal government owning, operating, and controlling every aspect of a 5G network for consumers. Everything after that point, I think, is downhill for us. From Andrew Wallace brings up the point he would worry about government intrusion, government access to spy on us if the 5G was completely controlled. We live in an era right now where net neutrality doesn't exist, so they would be able to completely control search and narrative, get in between services and consumers, and not only spy, but actively redirect or change information that consumers have access to. And then you would also have the bureaucratic relationship of how is this whole thing implemented? As much as I am a bleeding heart liberal, there are times where it's, my complaints about living in California and not having fiber and gigabit internet. A component of that is the fact that I live in the most liberal state in the nation. And I have to at least own my liberal shame whenever we do things that screw up too. So I really feel like the UK and the EU implementation of having stricter government regulation, stricter federal guidelines for how these services unroll, and then the administration and sort of iteration at the ground level falls on state and local governments and the companies that do business with state and local governments. We have a huge uphill battle to fight in competition at the state and local level. That's still a major problem, and one of the things that I think affects the net neutrality debate. But I still think it's better to have companies waging that battle and competing against each other than it would be to have one overall dictating resource from the federal government controlling those aspects. And I think this current administration is a perfect example of the fact that government works, and sometimes it works even when we don't want it to. When we had the Obama administration in place, we saw guidelines moving towards net neutrality. People voted out liberals, voted in conservatives, and within a year, we voted to remove net neutrality policy. Whenever we have that pendulum swing, then that federal government will get to dictate and decide what happens to the internet. And it's always going to be this hard pendulum flip back and forth and back and forth. And I think that would also cause a ton of market instability. For other companies that have to do business on the internet, you can't trust in 4 years when the new administration comes in, what's their policy on censorship? What's their policy on net neutrality? What's their policy on communications competition against traditional cell phone and data carriers? I think just across the board, this would be ruinous for the North American economy.
So I want to take at least a cursory look at something of, where government was involved in an infrastructure project to this effect, and that would be Australia with the National Broadband Network, the NBN. The proposals first came out in 2010, and then it was started with the opposing government taking over and then carrying out the idea. The leader of the opposing government at the time was like, no, we're not going to do this, and he ended up doing it anyways. So there's that. But it was a project to replace all the copper wiring with fiber. Mm-hmm. And over time, the politics of that, the money of that, was kind of switched around. And, we weren't dealing with, net neutrality with all these kind of other, contingent rules about eminent information domain and whatnot. But it was funny because there's fiber, and then it ended up being, we have to connect to the exchanges, and then the nodes. And, it was originally going to be fiber to the door, fiber to the house.
fiber to home.
Now, and then it became fiber to the node.
Yeah.
And
Well,
between that and, you know, all the copper wiring that still exists and still has to go through, speeds of gigabit, no, it's 25.
Yeah, I can't even
megabits.
get, I can barely get a 20 megabit upload, which again puts a huge crimp on ability to stream, to create content, to sort of leverage you know, a competitive stance in the world economy. When, you know, like our editor in chief Tony is paying like $10 a month for gigabit upload speeds in Romania. I'm suddenly less competitive as a content creator in, again, one of the world's largest economies and the most liberal state in the United States. So this is another thing too. We've gotten some comments here using the PN Weekly hashtag. We have we do need to do sort of an accounting. There were numerous fees associated with cable companies and cell phone carriers that would be tacked onto your bills for things like infrastructure and improvement. And there was a promise that we would be building out fiber to the home. And those companies largely sat on that cash, and it became just sort of another method of profitability for those companies. Not to say that there weren't network improvements. We can all point to marginal and iterative network improvements, but we never got what was promised us. And I think that's why we're also seeing a community backlash in making more sort of community funded initiatives for things like broadband. And we saw in Colorado with them fighting a Verizon lawsuit to do that. So this is from Renato Laporte in the Netherlands. Every house has a telephone cable because it was once made by a state-run company who didn't look at the costs. Now that same company, which is private, has put fiber to home in only 2% of the houses because it's costly. So having the network being run by the government and selling capacity to providers could be a solution to companies not covering rural areas because it costs a lot of money and has no returns. But there are also many downsides. And this is another huge debate that we're having here in the United States with how vast you know, the differing areas between urban and rural communities are. It can't just be a market-led decision. This is the liberal in me. We can't rely solely on the market because the market is perfectly happy to write off a significant amount of this population. They are not worth investing in improving data infrastructure, data services. You just can't make enough money on them, so they just don't exist. And that is a terrible position for a population segment in the United States to just suddenly disappear from the world economy. They are no longer, they are currently not competitive, and they don't exist in this conversation.
And with the activism that's going on with via connected internet premises, their political power just drops too.
Oh, totally. Oh, and they are not a part of this conversation. And this becomes a cyclical generational problem too. They are not worth investing in now, which means their schools, their hospitals, their communities are already underperforming, and they're just going to continue to fall further and further and further behind, farther and farther and farther behind the rest of the population, more urban and dense population centers. So we need to find some kind of balance there. If those people want to come together in their community and build a network and an infrastructure based on their own tax dollars, they should be allowed to, if they can show that companies refuse to service them. And we shouldn't have to fear of Verizon going in to sue an underperforming poor municipality and, you know, try and lawyer them to death while they're also disingenuously saying like, oh, we offer you broadband. You have, you know, a 1 megabit DSL connection. That's kind of like broadband. We should be able to point to better solutions than that. But we're also, I mean, that's also why we're completely stuck on a number of these issues. Laws at the state level kind of prevent a lot of that stuff. And that's also what Andrew Sislak is writing in PN Weekly. Is there a way the government can subsidize the implementations of 5G? And I'm sure there is, but then we also get into some of the uglier discussions on the government picking winners and losers. You know, I do share some concerns with my more libertarian leaning friends and tech pundits because we're sort of stuck in a holding pattern right now. What company is really going to invest in smaller communities and more rural communities and major cities that don't have real competition? At the same time, how can we make sure that the market actually does perform the way it's supposed to, even under the guiding hand of regulation, and not just picking, well, Verizon's kind of winning, so we'll just dump a whole bunch of money on Verizon and they can solve all the problems. That doesn't really service the future of American telecommunications. And it's a really ugly problem to try and unravel. That is actually, I make jokes about it, but that actually is what we're trying to face here in Southern California. Is we want to see what companies can truly deliver fiber solutions to homes, give them pole access, give them zoning for digging trenches if they need to, data centers. But those companies actually need to be able to deliver on that in a way that current cable and cell phone companies have promised, but not delivered on those kinds of promises. So you get the sticky back and forth. Like if an AT&T can't really deliver on a UVerse for the entire greater LA metropolitan area, then we shouldn't be giving them preferential zoning treatment. But if we don't give them preferential zoning treatment, then they're not even going to try.
Well, so I think government is already inert on enforcing the rules that it already has, because, the free market attitudes prevailing in the current administration. But, that's just
but the free market isn't really prevailing. I mean, we're seeing this administration absolutely, obviously favor certain industries over others, certain companies, certain regions over other regions. And again, I think we're always going to see some element of bias regardless of who's president. It's just, I don't know that I've ever seen an administration that was so obvious about what winners and losers they wanted to pick. When we have a president in the State of the Union talking about beautiful, clean coal as an energy strategy, I think it's pretty clear they're not even pretending to be fair, partial, or, objective in this analysis. So I just don't have high hopes for any kind of government run or government led initiative at this point, at least not until we can find some stronger counter voice, at least in the Senate and the House, and hopefully in other regulatory agencies that can kind of balance the executive at the moment.
Yeah, I know. Maybe just have the European Union, except the American Union, come in and create these rules for ourselves.
Well, that's actually, I mean, Jules, you're not wrong. And my fear is we're going to be seeing an increasing distance between the most competitive European and Asian markets and the United States. I think we're going to keep falling behind in general consumer adoption of new tech and new access and new services. And we already see that.
We create the standards that we don't even adopt.
Yeah. Well, no, totally. I mean, and we can't even reach some of the standards that these other countries take for granted at the moment. So when we're already sort of playing a bad hand and working from a deficit for a huge significant portion of this population, I don't see this administration and this current political climate being clever enough to find ways to help us catch up, let alone lead the way. We're pretending like we still lead the way, and we absolutely don't. Who will is gonna, again, that's gonna be an economic driver that's gonna have an impact on generations of consumers in this space.
Well, that's a thought to leave us on, I guess.
Yeah, let's end on a bummer. I think that's always fun.
Yeah, that's always it's Friday. I mean, you want to just, or if you're listening to the audio version of this, it's Monday or Tuesday, and
right.
You want to start your week off with a bummer. So
yeah, I'm actually, as soon as we're out of this podcast, I'm going to finish fixing my workstation, and then I am going to go and grab, hopefully get
you gotta grab a beer and Pro. Then go into the fetal position.
Yeah, and just cry myself to sleep in the shower. Wait, no, that's not. No, that's wrong.
You still have Lexi to deal with, so.
I still have my daughter to cope with. No, we're gonna go outside and play and have some fun. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna say, everyone, go outside, take a nice deep breath of fresh air, breathe in some Wi-Fi and 4G, and
be thankful that you don't have fiber to the node.
And go do something refreshing and life affirming. So, folks, I think we're gonna put a pin in it. This episode of the Pocketnow Weekly has come and gone Finally, it's over. And of course, the conversation outside of this continues on Twitter, where you can reach out to Jules at Point Jules, and I'm humbly at Some Gadget Guy. Pocketnow is around the web on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Google+, YouTube, and our home sites, pocketnow.com and es.pocketnow.com. Shows like this cannot exist without your support, sharing the weekly with your friends who love mobile technology, and leaving reviews wherever you can review a podcast, bringing new faces, new listeners to the table, new people to join the conversation, because shows like this cannot exist without your support. We want to thank you guys listening out there, sharing the podcast, leaving reviews, because the show wouldn't exist if it weren't for our listeners and subscribers who have kept us on the air since 2012. I lost my place. It just wouldn't. Regardless of whether or not I can read words on a laptop.
It wouldn't do anything. It wouldn't get pizza. It wouldn't enjoy the...
No. Perish the thought. So the Pocketnow Weekly will be back next week with all kinds of delicious technology goodness. So make sure you tune back